Why is it in those cases in which a decision does not go in favor of a Muslim or an Islamic association that the knee-jerk reaction by the perpetually offended is that Islamophobia is running wild? Case in point, recently a zoning change was proposed to allow a parcel of land in Saint-Apollinaire, Quebec, to be converted into a Muslim cemetery. The proposal was voted down by local residents in this town of 6,000 just southeast of Quebec City. Naturally, many Muslims and progressives deem this to be yet more anti-Islamic bigotry emanating out of La Belle Province. But was it really? Because what if the thumbs down decision by the locals had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with property ownership? Keep in mind, this piece of land was never intended to be a cemetery of any religious stripe. That's why new zoning was required. And I imagine many a landowner, regardless of their postal code or their religion, might take issue with a piece of land suddenly being transformed into a graveyard. 2 words, resale value. But allow me to play devil's advocate for a second. Let's just say the outcome of this vote had less to do with being anti-graveyard and more to do with common folk raising a collective middle finger at the political elites who seem obsessed in going out of their way to demonstrate reasonable accommodation when it comes to satiating Islam's never-ending demands. Indeed, in recent years, politicians and even unelected bureaucrats have been creating all kinds of exemptions for Muslims in Canada. We have Sharia swim times in public pools in which only women can swim, and the pool's windows are papered over to prevent the leering gazes of infidels. We have gender apartheid mosques in publicly funded schools in order to accommodate Islamic prayers, whereas the Lord's Prayer was long ago relegated to the scrap heap of politically incorrect traditions. In Windsor, we have a mosque illegally operating out of a single-family dwelling. Faith Goldie recently pointed out that a Muslim can get a firearms license with their face fully cloaked by a burqa, thereby making the photo ID useless. And as I exposed in a report last summer, Ontario now offers exemptions for Muslims when it comes to the rules surrounding animal slaughter, all at the potential expense of public safety. Oh, and let's not forget Motion 103, in which racism is condemned, but especially Islamophobia. The underlying message here being Islamophobia is obviously far more dire than any other phobia or something like anti-Semitism or anti-Buddhism or any other ism directed toward an identifiable group. And then there's the cherry on the Islamic accommodation sundae, namely that $10.5 million taxpayer check plus public apology to our own homegrown jihadist Omar Khadr. My take is that this endless bending over backwards by certain political elites to accommodate the squeaky wheel that is Islam is actually fueling anti-Islamic sentiment, not curtailing it. And the end result of those who play favorites, or are perceived to be playing favorites, is typically resentment. And it's entirely understandable. Just consider a National Post story that chronicled the Muslim cemetery debate. It quoted 73-year-old Julian Jonette just prior to the referendum. Jonette stated he was against the establishment of a Muslim cemetery, even though he wasn't one of the eligible 49 people who got to vote on the project. But here's what he had to say. Quote, "If the Muslim community didn't cause so many conflicts, they would have our support. They lost our support because they wanted to stir things up too much. They wanted their way. We want peace," end quote. Now, I believe that in our stifling climate of political correctness, most people in polite society would never dare utter such statements similar to what Mr. Jonette proclaimed. But you want to know something? I bet a majority of Canadians feel exactly the same way, that when it comes to Islam, the tail is now wagging the dog, and that so-called reasonable accommodation is really about political elites conveying a narrative that one particular group of people doesn't have to play by the rules other Canadians are beholden to. Bottom line, maybe the denial of the Muslim cemetery in this town was merely a landowner issue, but maybe it was the electorate telling their elected officials that when it comes to the never-ending reasonable accommodation of Islam, well, enough is enough already. For the Rebel.media, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Like what you just saw? Then click subscribe below and never miss another Rebel video.